Hello, everyone. Well, it looks like we'll get started now. I want to thank everyone who's able to join the presentation today. We have people from all over the US as well as a few international people. For everybody that's logged in, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depends where you're logging in from. Our topic today is going to be the blueprint for success, how an effective IT asset management assessment works. And before we get into the presentation, there's a lot of new names on the registration list. So I just want to quickly introduce who we are at Flycast Partners. For those who don't know us, at Flycast Partners, we are an IT service management, IT asset management, and operation management consulting company. We help organizations evaluate and implement IT service management, ITAM, and ITOM solutions, as well as assist in the best practice guidance for those processes. On the call, we have an ITAM expert today, Todd Hogan. Todd has over 25 years of hands-on experience in the ITAM space, helping organizations build and mature successful ITAM programs. Todd's worked with many large organizations to help them improve, build out a process, and continuously improve upon that with all the changes in the marketplace. So, Todd, I know we have a lot to cover today in a short amount of time, so I kind of want to kick it over to you before we go any further. Tell us a little bit about why we're here today and some of the work you've done with other organizations to build out and improve their ITAM processes.
Well, thanks, David. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and hello to everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about the ITAM assessment and the workshop. What we're going to be talking about is oftentimes companies struggle to get their ITAM program up and running, and the assessment is an evaluation process. We work together as a team collaboratively to identify the things we need to accomplish to be successful. And it's kind of interesting, David, as I've traveled around the world and spoken to many different companies, whether they're a Fortune 100 company or a small company, regardless of the vertical market or government, sector that they're in, it's interesting that I find that there's these common questions that come up when I go and meet with people. I'll say, why are we here today? What's their challenge? What are you going through? And I regularly hear kind of 6 consistent messages from these organizations. And so I thought maybe we could start by I'll share with you the things that I hear and see if they sound familiar to you. And then we'll talk about how we can solve some of those problems and how the assessment process is so key in helping organizations be successful. So let's just run through these 6 things, and they're kind of fun to talk about. The first thing when I go in and I'll meet with people, I'll say, well, what's going on? How are we doing? What's some of your challenges? And the first thing I almost universally hear is we have lots of assets. We're not sure where they are. We're not sure who's using them. In fact, we're not even sure what we should have. We think we know, but we have assets that are unaccounted for, and we're not sure who's using them. We have a problem with asset hoarding, because when we give an asset to an organization and they use it, but maybe that person leaves the company, they won't give it back to us. And so we basically have all kinds of different tools. We've tried different major tools, and unfortunately today we're still using a lot of Excel spreadsheets. And so that's kind of what I hear, and I'm always surprised about that, especially as here we are, with AI and all the cool things we're doing in the world, and we have people that still can't find, what assets they have. The next thing I'll hear, if there's a member on the team from the finance organization or procurement, they'll say, well, I'm concerned, not only do we not know what we have, but I'm not sure what they cost and where those costs are being allocated. It's really hard for us to forecast and plan our budgets because we don't know who's using what, and we don't know where the assets are being allocated and how effectively they're being used. So we're really struggling forecasting and knowing how to plan for the business because we're not sure where these assets are. The third team, sometimes this is actually in the last 5 years or so since COVID, sometimes this is number 1 on the issue, and that is the security team will speak up and say, look, we're really under pressure now to be able to know what assets are out there so we can keep them secure. So what I'm hearing now is the security people are saying to the asset people, hey, you've got to tell us what's out there so we know what to look for and how to keep it secure. And then there's always, obviously, the regulatory issues, the GDPR, the SOX, the HIPAA, PCI kinds of concerns. And so, people that are responsible for risk, these are the things that keep them up at night. They're really worried about the things they should know about, but they don't know about. The next group that I hear from is the IT operations people, and they'll say things like, it's just taking us too long to get new assets out. And so our people are frustrated. We need self-service. It's taking so long for us to refresh our assets that we have a problem with shadow IT because people are just taking it into their own hands. Organizations are saying, hey, I don't trust IT to get us what we need. And so they're just doing their own thing. And so it's a constant battle. And so I'm really concerned, the operations people will say, I'm concerned about how effective we are in helping our employees have the right assets at the right time. And so we're really behind the curve here. We're struggling. So after those four people, or after those four different organizations pipe up and speak, it always seems like then somebody will say, not only do we have to do all of those things, but we have to do it with less people. We don't have enough resources. So, tell me, Todd, how can we use IT asset management to solve these problems? But I don't have more headcount. I don't have enough people to do what we're doing now. So we need to figure out a way to do more with less, which just makes this whole problem seem so challenging because everybody's struggling and there's not more resources. And then finally, the last is I'll hear from an executive in the room and say, look, here's the bottom line. Today, we don't trust our data, but going forward, we need to be able to trust that data to make better business decisions. And we need to hold our people accountable for these assets because we're kind of this black hole of spend. We just keep spending and spending and spending, and we have to get our arms around that. So these are the things that I hear. David, does this sound familiar from the Flycast side?
It sounds very familiar, Todd. Probably three or four of the different challenges you share are in almost every engagement we're doing. When we talk to our clients, they 9 times out of 10 are coming to us with an IT service management goal or objective to improve those processes. And then often ITAM is just one small component of that IT service management space. So, we're really not working with organizations that are truly digging into ITAM. So, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more on like why an ITAM process and why is doing ITAM so challenging for organizations.
For those of you who are joining us today, if any of these things sound familiar, as David just expressed also, it might be time to either reevaluate your ITAM program or create an ITAM program, but that comes with some challenges. And that's the purpose of our discussion today. We're going to dig into, how can we solve these challenges? Because I've met with many customers who've tried this many times. They'll go out and spend money on an expensive tool. They'll try to implement the tool, and at about the 18-month mark, the wheels fall off. Everybody says, hey, we don't trust the data. Everybody gets mad at the vendor they bought the tool from, but the challenge is they're still not solving the problem. And what I've found in my experience is that ITAM has many different stakeholders. It's not just the asset manager. I need to make sure I'm working with the procurement team because they're the ones who source these assets. They're the ones who might be leasing the assets. And so they're responsible for getting the assets in a timely fashion, and also the finance people who are refreshing the assets, the HR people who are, trying to keep happy employees. It just, the list goes on. And it's interesting when I talk to different companies, I've kind of got the full gamut of potential stakeholders here. But in each organization, I find that there's 2 or 3 of these different stakeholders that you're looking at on your screen that are really, kind of the impact people for that particular organization. And I suspect that's true in your organizations. There may be places where, you guys have got a really well-refined procurement process and they're working well with you on the IT side. And there may be others of you where that's a procurement process that's over in Coupa or PeopleSoft. And there's just silos away of disorganization as it relates to getting asset information to you. So this is the challenge that I find is that it's hard to do asset management because it's not in a silo. It's just not the asset manager who's responsible for this. We have to participate with lots of different people. And this is where I think most companies begin to fail is that they think that the asset manager is going to be able to handle this and they don't talk to and spend the time they need to work with the other organizations. David, is that kind of what you're seeing from the Flycast side?
We're typically seeing that scenario where somebody is in control of that and it's all on that person's shoulders and they're they're under-resourced. They're not necessarily getting buy-in from everybody. And we're also seeing in many cases, and again, I think this is a problem for a lot of organizations, is they don't necessarily have the resources to have a dedicated asset manager or asset management team. And the kind of the responsibilities of that function is being spread out over maybe one or two or three different resources who are all taking different and siloed approaches to asset management that just in how it relates to their job function and their role within the organization.
What I've found is that one person, even one team, one asset management team can't do this by themselves. And one of the key value propositions of the assessment process is the education that happens as we begin to collaborate and show that that asset manager has to collaborate with everyone. They're kind of become they're a fantastic negotiator, they're a fantastic project manager, they're a fantastic salesperson. The asset management person has to wear many hats. But what needs to happen is that everyone else that you're, on these organizations that you're looking at there, everyone needs to understand how asset management impacts their life and the role that their organization plays with the asset manager to be successful. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And there's 5 steps that we use in the assessment process to kind of help build this collaborative effort so that the asset manager and the asset management team is not trying to do this by themselves. Because the number one failure point I see, well, there's 2 really. It's bad data, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But it's the assumption that everyone in the organization thinks that the asset manager is going to solve this by themselves. That's just not possible, because all of these other stakeholders have to play a key role, and the asset manager has to be kind of the broker and the partner and the negotiator and to help everyone come together to solve this problem. So let's talk about those 5 steps that we're going to use in the assessment process to help us solve some of these problems. First one is by far, I think, the foundation and the most important step as we start, and that's to identify the business requirements that are necessary for success. And we're gonna go into detail for each one of these. The next step is, once we know the business requirements, we're going to identify the ITAM best practices that are required to support that. Because so many times I'll see companies say, well, I've got these requirements and we're going to go get this done, but they don't take the time to make sure that fundamental steps, fundamental data elements, fundamental processes are in place to be successful. So we'll talk about those defined processes that are required to help you be successful. The third step is also really important, and that's where we baseline how you're doing it today. How are assets coming into your environment? How are they being managed? And how are they leaving your environment? And there's some really great learning things that happen in this step, and I'm excited to share that with you. Number 4 is, now that we've kind of talked about the process or the business requirements, the best practices, we know how things are working in your environment, we've identified the weaknesses, we're going to now map. We're going to get down to the data level, because we can't live up in the pie in the sky level. We have to get down to the individual attribute level that says, okay, this particular piece of data is required for me to solve this business problem. And we're going to talk about how important and critical it is to understand that, this activity at the data level, because if we don't get down to the data level, nothing matters. And then the last step is where the consultant, FlyCast, will come in and say, hey, we've analyzed all of this data, and now we've got some findings for you and steps to go forward. So that's the process that we're going to use. And so now let's kind of drill into this process. And the first step is the business requirements and gathering of those business requirements. And this is critical. Right off the bat, we need to understand this isn't just the business requirements of the asset manager. This has to be the business requirements of the procurement person, of the finance person, of the IT operations team, of the security team, of the HR team. These have to be requirements for everyone where asset management impacts their world. And so what needs to happen in this process is, if you do this right, this is where you break down a lot of those silos and barriers, because we're approaching this from a business problem. And so the whole business has to come together, and everyone, all these different stakeholders, they share what their requirements are. everyone else is listening going, oh, okay, I realize now that Mary over in finance needs this issue, and Paul over in IT ops has this issue. And so everyone's learning and talking as we go through this process. It's really critical that everyone understand all the impacts of that asset management has on the individual organizations. Paul, does this make sense in in the experience that you're coming from? Or, I'm sorry, Paul, David.
No worries. I think Paul was probably the second choice my parents wanted to name me. So that was
I don't know where
a little
Paul came
insight
from.
there.
That's crazy. Sorry, David.
No worries, Todd. Yeah, and so going back to like what you mentioned with collaboration, that is something we've seen in a lot of our engagements, whether it's been in an RFP process or during an IT service management implementation where we're getting to the asset piece, and it goes back to oftentimes there's either a lack of stakeholders giving their input, right? Where there's certain organizations or functions who are almost forgotten about and not included in these discussions prior to an engagement or a strategy, or there's stakeholders that, like you mentioned, say, okay, well, our infrastructure team has that or somebody else has that. And a lot of people in the organization may not realize that how important and valuable their input is into this process and how much that it's actually going to affect how they operate and do their job functions in the organization. So that's what we've seen. And I think the value of these assessments more than anything is helping create that value throughout the organization so everybody's on the same page and they know where they fit specifically and where they will benefit from being an active participant and stakeholder.
I can't overstate the importance of getting these business requirements defined. And what I'll do a lot of times during these assessments is I'll actually bring up a spreadsheet, I call our working document. And as we go through, I will type in. Sometimes it's painful because I'm a terrible typer, but I do this intentionally because I type out the question, the business requirement, and I force everyone to, as I'm typing that out, to hear and listen to the business requirement so that everyone at the end of this process knows exactly what these business requirements are. Because if we go through the rest of the assessment focused on the business requirements, we can kind of remove the hurtful feelings that come with politics and silos and bureaucracies because we're focusing on a business problem. And people tend to look at it now as a business problem instead of somebody saying, hey, you're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or you don't like my process, or I don't make you happy. All those kinds of things we tend to struggle with as we bring in new technologies. And so these requirements are super important. But once we have the requirements defined, that's step one. Remember, our step two was now we're going to talk about best practice. So I'll then take a look at their business requirements and I'll say, okay, here's some of the fundamental best practices that we need to make sure are in place to be successful. And we'll spend some time going through ITAM best practice. I'm personally a big fan of the ITAM organization. And so I'll talk a lot about their disciplines and the things that they profess in terms of, best practice. There are there's some really key best practices that I try to make sure everyone understands, because these are the failing points that I see 80% of the time. And they're kind of boiled down into these three fundamental blocks, these fundamental elements. And the first one is you have to know what you should have. And so we'll talk about, well, how will you as an organization know what you should have? What assets should I be managing? Well, that comes because we have to know what we've purchased or what we've leased or what we've acquired in an acquisition. So understanding before we ever touch that asset, what we've purchased, what we've leased, what we've acquired through an acquisition is critical for our success. The next one is discovery. And this is where a lot of people start. And this is where a lot of people find themselves in trouble after that 18-month mark that I mentioned. And that is because they tend to say, well, I'll just manage whatever I can discover through Intune or SCCM or Avanti Neurons or BigFix or whatever discovery tool you're using. The challenge with that is I only know what I'm got an agent on. And so if I don't have the purchasing side to say, here's what I should have, then I'm going to be in trouble. And what best practice says is, hey, discovery is only a validation of the fact that what I already knew about that tool from a procurement process. And yes, it's still out there. I saw it from the discovery scan this morning. It's still out there. And so discovery and purchasing both have to be in place. You can't just have one and be successful. And then on the other side of that is, knowing what's happening with that asset. I have to have interactivity with my operations people who are moving those assets around when they go from build to marry, or when they get repaired, or when they get disposed. And so all three of those fundamental elements have to be in place. And so helping customers like yourselves understand that there are fundamental things that have to be in place to be successful is key. After we've talked about, after we get those fundamentals in place, then we want to be able to make sure that our tool, regardless of what tool you choose, the tool has the metrics to give you some really critical information. And so we want to make sure, we'll talk about those types of metrics that we can see. And so we can go into, some easy dashboards that point out the obvious, the things where most customers struggle with. We want that to be up in front so that as an asset manager and an asset management team, we can immediately go there and solve problems. And so you want to drill down into those. So we want to make sure our tool has those capabilities, and most tools do nowadays. And so that's just part of that best practice element. The third thing that we're going to talk about is, now we're going to baseline. And this is something that I really like doing, because I find that this is a great experience for everyone that participates. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to go around the room, and it's really important we have the right people in the room to do this. We need all the stakeholders to say, okay, how does an asset come into your environment today? How does it work through procurement? How does that service request, asset request work? What does purchasing do? How do we check what's in stock? Do we lease? Do we purchase? How do we receive the assets? What happens when the assets are received? Do they go to a holding area? Do they immediately get provisioned? Do you provide your assets out of a stock pool, or do you buy just in time? All of those kinds of questions really make a big difference in your success. And so understanding how you're doing it today is critical. And then also, once you have that asset and it's assigned to somebody, how do we manage its life cycle? I hear so many customers say, Todd, here's what we want as a business requirement. When someone leaves the company, I want to be able to know exactly what assets they have so I can reclaim them, because we've got a real problem. We're losing lots of assets when people leave the company. They take them with them because we don't know what they have. And so as a business requirement, I will say, okay, great. In order to get that, in order to achieve that goal of what you want as an asset, as a business person, we need to make sure then that during this life cycle process, that when that asset's being managed by someone, that when it goes from Todd's hands to David's hands, that the help desk team or the field operations team, that they go into the asset tool and make those assignments. And if we don't do that, then you're never going to get your business requirement. So again, we break down those silos based on the business requirement, because everyone has to participate. And that's the magic of the assessment, is that the whole company comes together and understands everyone's role, and everyone's participation is key to achieving the business requirements. So this is a process where we document this. And what's really important is that everyone is here. Every one of these key stakeholders participates in this. And it's really hard because everybody's busy, and some procurement person goes, I don't have time for the IT asset people. The finance guy goes, I don't have time for that, But what's important is if they're there and we go through that process together, all of a sudden they realize that the one business requirement they have is entirely dependent on this other team doing their task. And so as everyone understands their individual roles and responsibilities, then we get success. And if they don't participate, this is what happens when people go out, they buy a tool, they start to populate the data in the tool. And then when it comes time for the data to be accurate, no one participates because they didn't realize it was their responsibility. So this is a really critical process. David, what do you see in terms of organizations understanding their, what's important to them from an individual contribution stake? What are you seeing out there? Does this make sense?
Absolutely. I was thinking back to many examples I have are on the IT service and management space where we're in the middle of a deployment, where we're working through scope, and then a unknown stakeholder during UAT testing says, "Hey, this isn't what I thought it would be." But they never had a seat at the table early on. They were never on the same page as the rest of the organization. And that applies for asset management as well. You gave a great example earlier of employee offboarding, right? You have the screen up here, how several different departments within an organization has a role in employee offboarding. And I guarantee you a lot of organizations haven't thought about, okay, as it relates to the assets that those organizations and that process is touching, how many of these people need to understand their roles? So I believe the assessment and everything you're reviewing comes to one of the biggest overarching challenges we have in any type of project or implementation or building out a more mature process is organizational change management. When we can get everyone on the same page and when those individuals come and have a well-defined process, it's not overwhelming, right? It's not, the HR department or, the finance team saying, "Hey, that's not my problem," or "That's just too much for me to be involved. I'm not an ITSM manager." When you define these goals, uh, it's a much more straightforward piece that you can get some adoption. And when we can approach things with an organization about getting everyone on that same page, those implementations and projects go that much smoother and really reduce the bottlenecks that derail and prolong projects or stall them altogether.
I like to call these moments, this is the best part of my job. I love doing this step 3 because what happens is I call them the aha moments. I start to hear people saying things like, "I now understand why you needed that." Or, "Remember me telling you why our forecast data was wrong? Now we know why. We've got to work together." Or somebody will say, "I had no idea your team did that. I thought somebody else did that." These are the defining moments when the organization comes together and understands that their role is critical to someone else's business requirement success. And I think this is probably the most important non-data element, if you will, where people understand, you know what, I have a role in this, and now I know why I have to do that. Sometimes people will say, "Why do I have to? It's Friday night. Why are you asking for this data? I hate this." Well, this process is about helping them understand why what they're being asked to do is so important. And it really is fun. It's a fun thing. And I find that everything kind of changes after this point because everyone's kind of on the same page and they understand there's a business requirement needed by the business, and I now have a responsibility to do my end of it, and I understand why. So a great process. I love these aha moments. Out of this data, we learn our strengths and our weaknesses. And so as part of the findings, we can come back and say, you know what, we're doing procurement really, really well today. But you know what, our life cycle activity is really struggling. We aren't keeping up to date with, where these assets are moving about in the organization. So this is where we get that knowledge, the strengths and weaknesses, and we want to turn our weaknesses into strengths and keep our strengths. So again, it's all part of everyone collaborating together. Okay, now that we've kind of boiled this, we've got these processes down, we understand responsibilities. Now's where we get to the meat and potatoes. Now we're going to move into the actual data elements, the individual data elements that are going to give us the answers to the business requirements. So we do this thing called the mapping exercise, where we take individual data elements like where does the make, model, and part number come from? Where does the purchase date come from? Where does the warranty information come from? Who's going to be responsible for assigning that asset to a specific location or user? Where is our discovery data? Where are we going to get that last scan date from? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to break that down by individual attributes, data elements. We're going to say, where is the data source? Where are we going to get it from? And then most importantly, we're going to assign this down to a person or a team, with that team having, being led by a person. Because this is where everything tends to fall apart if you don't do this. We now all agree that these business requirements are necessary. We understand the processes. And now we have to make the assignment at the data level. It says, hey, you know what, Bill, you're responsible for that data. Susan, this is your job. And if we do that, now, we can be successful. I just think that if you have good data, you win. If you have bad data, about the 18-month mark, people go, hey, I don't trust this data. This tool stinks. I've got my own spreadsheet, and we're back in spreadsheet heaven again. Because I shouldn't say heaven, it's more like spreadsheet hell, because we don't trust the data we had in our system. David, what's your experience here?
Todd, you nailed the head on the coffin as much as possible there, right? All the time we'll engage with a new client because they rolled out an ITAM tool, a discovery tool, or they have multiple ITAM tools, and they come and go, oh, well, we need to replace it. We need to replace this solution because it just didn't work. And oftentimes we find out they didn't have an asset management strategy. They didn't have true metrics of what they were looking to accomplish and where the responsibility lied on those. Sometimes their goal is, well, let's just go replace that tool and spend a lot of money on something that 1 or 3 year subscription becomes shelfware eventually. So I feel like when you get to this stage, this is almost another level of one of those aha moments when each of these silos can see how the data and the business requirements correlate. I think this is like level 2 of your aha moments, right?
Yeah, and once you get to this level, think about this. We're doing all this work before, maybe you haven't even bought the tool yet. Maybe you guys out there today, you're thinking about moving towards a tool, but you haven't made a selection on the tool. We're going to do this assessment process before you ever buy the tool, because you know what we want to do? We want to make sure when you buy that tool has the ability to do the things we've identified in this assessment. And if you do, you're going to hit a home run. So many people do is they let the tool define their processes. No. You have to make sure the tool supports your processes and your data elements. And if you do that, you'll be wildly successful. So now we've done these first 4 steps. Now it becomes Flycast job, my job, to come back to you guys and say, okay, here's the roadmap for success. Here's a written acknowledgement of your strengths and weaknesses. So you can share it and digest it and look at it from as a team perspective and plan, because you got some work to do. We've identified some areas where you don't have very good processes. So that's going to take some fixing. Okay. We're going to tell you the best practices you need to be successful. We're going to tell you, hey, you guys don't have a dedicated asset manager today. If you want to get serious about this, you better find some headcount, because you can't do it with just 1 or maybe 2 or maybe 3, right? You've got to know that so you can be prepared to be successful. Policies and procedures, training. We got a lot of training to do. It's key, helping everyone understand their role, their responsibilities, how to use the tool to make it successful. And then finally, everybody has to understand this is a journey. You're not going to do all your assets on day 1. In fact, as a consultant, I will never encourage you to try and do everything on day 1. It's a recommendation for failure. So once we've identified kind of the readiness steps you need, then we're going to give you some exacting steps. What do we need to do on day 1? Well, day 1, number 1 item, make sure we have executive support. Make sure our executives are giving us the air cover we need to be successful. Then we're going to prioritize those assets. Maybe we're going to start out by just doing our laptops first. We're not going to do anything else but laptops. So we're going to kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time. Then we're going to make sure step 3 is critical. We want to make sure that as you roll this first phase out, that you can get some immediate success. We want our stakeholders to come back in a matter of days or weeks and go, wow, this is fantastic. This is exactly what we need. How soon can we get the servers in there? How soon can we get our mobile devices in there? Get people excited. And so when we present the deliverables, we want you to make sure that they're in bite-sized chunks and that each one of them have, some very powerful success and milestones to help you move forward. Emphasize training and communication. We want to make sure everybody can, understands the data, knows what's required, be successful. And then we want to showcase and market our success. One of the hats you will wear as an asset manager is sometimes you have to toot your own horn. So what we always tell our clients is, hey, make sure you baseline how it's not working today so that when you do it right, you can go back and do a presentation and said, hey, remember a couple of months ago, this is what it used to look like. And now this is what it looks like. You have to make sure you market your successes. It's really important. And then the final thing is be ready for some adjustments. There's going to be some changes. Somebody's going to say, hey, you know what? Now that we're doing this, we've got a critical audit coming up. We've got to get some software in there now, or we've got to do something else. And so be ready to adjust. So those are kind of the keys to success. David, does that sound reasonable from your experience?
Absolutely. And Todd, I think one area we get to, and it's been a common theme, is a lot of times organizations are trying to improve upon these processes and they stall out, or they just fizzle out because, again, people are working in silos to achieve these goals opposed to all coming at a unified piece. And I think sometimes that's why having a third party come in to work on these assessments can help avoid that piece, right? Because it's a message loud and clear that the organization as a whole is invested in maturing an asset management process that's going to benefit throughout the entire organization. I really appreciate the kind of the comments and sentiments you have here on how to get our customers to the next stage.
Yeah, and finally, getting to the next phase is really critical. So I want to reiterate again how important it is to get momentum, to be successful, to start small, get some successes, and get people excited about this. That will give you the air cover, the funding, the things you need to be successful. And one other thing that I see sometimes is, my guess is that many of you who are listening today, this is just common sense to you. And you're like, yeah, I've been trying to get this done for a long time. And so what I find is sometimes when you have an outside source, an outside organization like FlyCast come in and will help you through this assessment, even though we're telling the same story that you've been telling your people, sometimes getting someone from an external opinion can really help drive the point home and help you be successful. So that's everything I have, David. And again, I apologize for calling you Paul. Let me give you a little background there. My best friend's name is Paul. He called me this morning and he was on my mind. And so I apologize for calling you Paul, David. But I hope this has been helpful. And if there's any questions, we'd love to get back and respond. So
I appreciate that, Todd. And it sounds like calling me Paul was an endearing subconscious thing. So
there you go.
Yeah, it's been great, working with you so far, Todd. And I look forward to how we can start having our customers utilize your skill set. A lot of times we are engaged with clients who have one or multiple asset management discovery tools, and they don't have that process in place, so they don't see that they're getting value in that solution. And oftentimes, the goal of this assessment is to come in and prevent you from going out and just purchasing a different solution for no reason. Maybe the tools you have in place will work successfully and you'll start seeing a value in what you already have, or it'll help you identify gaps that you may have and give you a really good idea of what type of software you need to accomplish those goals, so that when you actually purchase that software, you already have a plan in place on how to utilize it and how to get value out of that, so that 6, 12, 18 months into the contract of a new solution that you have, you say, wow, we really haven't been getting the value that we're paying on an annual basis or a monthly basis for it. So I do know we are closing out on time, and I see a lot of questions in the chat. I don't think we'll have time to really address all of the questions. I appreciate the amount we had so far. What I'll do, Todd, is we're going to wrap up and we'll look at all those questions that have been submitted, and we will reach out with some type of response, trying to answer your question as much as possible. We also will be sending out there'll be a survey after this webinar. We always love to hear feedback on how the content we're providing was valuable, what other type of content our customers are looking to see through these webinars. And there'll also probably be a question there for anybody who wants to have a discussion with Todd a little bit more about how these assessments would work within your organization, we're happy to set those up. I know, Todd, you are very passionate about the IT asset management space. I just know that when you finish up an engagement, there's a lot of joy for you where you get to see how the organization takes that information, that process, and applies it. I really want to thank you for being on today and sharing more about this assessment that we're very happy and proud to be able to offer to our clients.
Well, thanks. It's been a pleasure. And I, as you said, I'm happy to visit with anyone because it's all about success. It's about winning. It's about doing it right and finally getting away from those spreadsheets and trusting your data. So it's been a pleasure.
Thanks again, Todd. And I want to thank our audience, everyone who signed up. Appreciate everyone's time today, and everyone have a great morning, afternoon, or evening.